DMT is the strongest hallucinogen there is. If it's possible to get more loaded than that, I don't want to know about it. And I say so when I'm there. I say, my God, if you can get more loaded than this, keep it away from me. So that's it. It's the strongest. It's also the shortest acting. DMT, when smoked, in most people, is return you to normal in under 10 minutes. Under 10 minutes. Now, this is interesting because people who think there's nothing to this, who should actually invest the 10 minutes to find out what's, a 10-minute DMT trip is worth 20 years of academic pharmacology, art history, psychology, and all this other malarkey. Because then you just say, okay, I got it. Another very interesting thing about DMT is it occurs naturally in the human brain. Well, now what's going on here? He's saying the strongest drug, the fastest drug, is the most natural drug. It means that, you don't have to sail off into 3-hydroxy-4-pyridyl N-methyl-marubishtik or something like that to get into the exotic realms. No, a human metabolite, which takes only 10 minutes to undergo its entire exfoliation and quenching, is the strongest of all. Well, then what is it? What does strong mean? What is a strong psychedelic? It's highly personal. Every psychedelic trip is. But what happens on DMT for a large number of people, we don't have any statistics, but it is a completely confounding experience. You may have had the expectation, you might think if you had never had a psychedelic experience, that it sort of begins like the Bach B minor fugue and goes from there as you rise into the realms of light and union with the deity or something like that. That's not what happens on DMT. What happens on DMT I referred to this morning. A troupe of elves smashes down your front door and rotates and balances the wheels on the after-death vehicle, present you with the bill, and then depart. And it's completely paradigm shattering. Union with the white light you could handle. An invasion of your apartment by jeweled self-dribbling basketballs from hyperspace that are speaking in demotic Greek is not something that you anticipated and could handle. Sometimes people say, is DMT dangerous? It sounds so crazy. Is it dangerous? The answer is only if you fear death by astonishment. Remember how you laughed when this possibility was raised, and a moment will come that will wipe the smile right off your face. And this death by astonishment thing, one thing about it, let me say a little bit more about it. One thing that endears DMT to me is, I like to say, it doesn't affect your mind. It doesn't seem to affect your mind. In other words, you don't change under the influence of DMT. You don't become a kinder, gentler person. You don't sink into, a line of drool from one corner of your mouth as you sit there twitching. You don't change. What happens is the world is completely replaced. Instantly, 100%, it's all gone. And what is put in its place, not one iota of what is put in its place was taken from this world. So it's a 100% reality channel switch. They don't even retain three-dimensional space and linear time. It's not like you go to an exotic place, Morocco or New Guinea. It's like reality is swapped out for something else. And when you try to say what it is, you realize that language has evolved in this world, and it can serve no other. It takes years of practice. So what you're looking at is literally the unspeakable. The indescribable falls into your lap. And when you try, you're loaded, right? You're there, and you're trying to explain to yourself what's happening. And so this is like you try to pour water over the transdimensional objects in front of you, the water of language, and it just beads up and flows off like water off a duck's back. You cannot say what's there. And I've spent, 25 years fiddling with this. It's become the compass of my inspiration, trying to say what is on the other side of that boundary. Just 2 large tokes away at any given time is this non-Euclidean, non-Newtonian, irrational, un-Englishable place. But it's not smooth and empty and clear. That's not what gives it its indescribability. What gives it its indescribability is its utter weirdness, its alienness, its power to astonish. What happens to me when I smoke DMT is there's a kind of a going toward it. There's a sequela of events which lead to the antechamber of the mystery. I mean, you take a toke, you feel strange. Your whole body feels odd. You take a second toke, all the oxygen seems to have been pumped out of the room. Everything jumps into clarity. It's that visual acuity thing. You take a third toke if you're able, and then you lay back and you see this thing which looks like a rose or a chrysanthemum, this orange spinning flower-like thing. It takes it about 15 seconds to form, and it's like a membrane. And then you break through it. You break through it, and then you're in this place. And there's an enormous cheer which goes up as you pass through this membrane. Some of you may know the Pink Floyd song about how the gnomes have learned a new way to say hooray. They're waiting. And you burst in to this place, and you're saying, geez, this stuff is really speedy. I mean, that's like describing a space shuttle launching as noisy. You say, this stuff is, and you say, am I all right? Am I all right? That's the first question. And so then you run your mind around the track, and you say, heartbeat, normal, yeah, normal. Heartbeat, normal. Pulse, normal. Breathing, breathe, yes. But what's right here, and from here out is this thing, which no matter how much science fiction you've done, no matter how much William Burroughs you've read, no matter how much time you've spent in the company of the weird, the bizarre, the outre, and the peculiar, you weren't ready. And it's completely real. It's in a way more real than the contents of ordinary reality, because see how the shadows here are muted, and there's a lot of transitional zones from one color to another and so forth. This isn't like that. This is crystalline, clear, solid. You can see the light reflected in the depths of these objects, and everything is very brightly colored, and everything is moving very, very rapidly. And there are entities there. It's not about calling them up or the whisperings of them. No, they're in your face. and they're right here, and they're worse than in your face, because what they do is they jump into your chest, and then they jump out, and so you're like this. And you have to keep saying, keep breathing, don't freak out, pay attention, and the entities speak to you. And they speak both in English and another way, which we'll get to in a minute. But in English, what they say is, do not give way to wonder. Hang on. Don't just go gaga with disbelief. Pay attention, pay attention. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to show you something. They are very aware of the fleeting nature of this encounter. And they say, don't just spiral off into amazement and start raving about God and all that. Forget that. Pay attention to what we're doing. And then what they're doing is they're dancing around, they're jumping around, they're emerging explicitly out of the background, bounding toward you, jumping into your chest, bounding away, and they make offerings. And they love you. That's the other thing. They say this. They say, we love you. You come so rarely. And, here you are. Welcome, welcome. And then they make these offerings. And the offerings are objects of some sort. And now remember, you are not changed. You're exactly the person you were a few minutes before. So you're not exalted or depressed. You're just trying to make sense of this. And the objects which they offer are like Fabergé eggs, or exquisitely tooled and enameled pieces of machinery, but they don't have rigid outlines. These objects are themselves somehow alive and transforming and changing. So when these creatures, I call them tykes, when these tykes offer you these objects, you grok it, you look at it, and immediately, because you are yourself, you have this realization, my God, if I could get this thing back into my world, history would never be the same. A single one of these objects is somehow, you can tell by looking at it, this would confound my world beyond hope of recovery. It cannot exist. What I'm being shown is a tiny area where miracles are being transformed. And the creatures, the tykes, are singing. They are speaking in a kind of translinguistic glossolalia. They are actually making these objects with their voices. They are singing these things into existence. And what the message is do what we're doing. You can do what we're doing. Do it. And they get quite pushy about this. They say, damn it, do it. And you're saying, but, and saying, no, do it now, do it. It's saying, I can't handle this, and then this kind of reaction goes on for a while. Well, then I don't take credit for it. It was not willed, but like something comes up from inside of you. Something comes out of you, and you discover you can do it. That you can use language to condense objects into existence in this space. It's the dream of all magic. But here it is, folks, happening in real time. And then they're just delighted. They just go mad with delight and turn somersaults and turn themselves inside out. And they all jump into your chest at once. And after many, many encounters of this sort, when I first did DMT, I couldn't bring anything out of it. I just said, no, it's the damnedest thing I've ever encountered, and I can't say anything about it, and I don't think I ever will be able to say anything about it. But by going back repeatedly and working at it, I think I've gotten a pretty coherent, well, let's not go that far. I think I've got a pretty clear metaphor, anyway, for what's happening in there. And I think a lot of people have this experience. When you talk to shamans, they say, oh, well, yes, the helping spirits. Those are the helping spirits. They can help you cure, find lost object. You didn't know about helping spirits? I said, well, I knew, but I had no idea, that it was so literal. Say, oh, no, that's the helping spirits. But then the other thing they say, if you press a shaman, if you say, well, what exactly is a helping spirit? Say, well, a helping spirit is an ancestor. Say, you mean to tell me that those are dead people in there? Say, well, yes, ancestor, dead person. You didn't know about ancestors, apparently. This is what happens to people who die. And you say, my God, is it possible that what we're breaking into here is an ecology of souls? That these are not extraterrestrials from Zenebel Ganubi or Zeta Reticuli Beta. These are the dear departed. And they exist in a realm which, for want of a better word, let's call eternity. And somehow this drug, or whatever it is allowing me to see across the veil. This is the lifting. You want to talk about boundary dissolution. It's one thing to get tight to your partner. It's quite another to get tight to the dear departed of centuries past. That's a serious boundary dissolution when that happens. What these creatures want, according to them, is they want us to transform our language somehow. And I don't know what this means. I mean, at this point in the weekend and in my life, we all are on the cutting edge, and nobody is ahead of anybody else. Clearly, we need to transform our language because our culture is created by our language, and our culture is toxic, murderous, and on a downhill bummer. Somehow we need to transform our language. But is this what they mean? That we're supposed to condense machines out of the air in front of us? How does this relate to the persistent idea promulgated by Robert Graves and other people that there is a primal language of poetry? That poetry as we know it is a pale, pale thing, and that at some time in the human past, people were in command of languages which literally compel belief. They compel belief because they don't make an appeal through argument or metaphor. They compel belief because they're able to present themselves as imagery. You know, William Blake said, if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. And so these things and it's very confusing because you wonder, you say, well, have people been doing this for thousands of years? And if so, have they always encountered this tremendous urgency on the other side? If people have been doing it for thousands of years, why is there this urgency on the part of these entities? And who exactly and what exactly are they? It appalls me, you can probably tell, that I have to talk about this because this is not my bailiwick. I mean, I'm a rationalist who's just had a very weird set of experiences, but I am a rationalist. I mean, I have no patience with channeling, the lords of the many rays, the divas, and, there's this whole thing going around about disincarnate intelligence, and it's mostly under the control of fairly, shall we say, non-rigorous thinkers. But I like to think that I am a rigorous thinker, and yet here I am telling you that, you know, elf legions await in hyperspace, one toke away. The difference between my rap and, you know, the Findhorn folks or somebody like that is that we have an operational method for testing my assertion. We can all smoke DMT, or you can make it your business to now find out about this and see for yourself. And not everybody agrees with me. I mean, some people say, you know, it wasn't anything like that. But some people agree. And I think if you get 2 out of 10 agreeing with a rap like this, then you better pay attention.
This is the central question that I've been wrestling with for the last 20 or so years, right? We don't know the answer to that question, but there are a number of explanations for the DMT experience. First of all, the kind of the orthodox explanation for this is, oh, it's your brain is just making it up. It's a wild cortical fabrication. But that's never made much sense to me, because we know that the brain wasn't dropped to earth ready to kind of construct worlds. The brain evolved to construct the normal waking world as a model of the environment. This is the world your brain knows, has learned, has evolved to construct. It knows how to construct one world model, right? So then you ask the question, well, how is it then possible that when you perturb the brain with this simple plant alkaloid, it suddenly becomes capable of constructing entirely coherent, inordinately complex, hyperdimensional worlds filled with seemingly hyper-intelligent beings? And that is, to me, remains a great mystery, unless somehow the brain is receiving information from somewhere else that's kind of constraining and modulating and informing its construction of this alternate world model. That is why it's such a problem, in my opinion, to explain DMT.
Everybody, when they do DMT, they always experience the same thing. They always experience these extreme geometrical patterns, and they all experience these so-called elves that are dancing around telling them things, like giving them positive messages that are transformative in some aspect or another. Is this pretty much consistent through everyone?
One of Stephen Zara's first subjects described these little dwarf-like beings that moved around very quickly. That's all we got. But to me, this is part of the characteristic of these DMT elves, these very sprightly, lively beings, often very cheerful, and they kind of welcome you into the space, and they love to show you things all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. The large gap between their intelligence and this is their world after all that we're kind of entering, if you like. So, and they like to kind of have fun, some of them. So there's a lot of kind of mocking going on sometimes, teasing,
right?
Kind of trickstery kind of behavior with these entities. They like to scare you. So you have to be kind of aware of that. But there's no evidence that they can actually do you any harm, other than giving you a bit of a scare. The fact that the brain can construct these realities, as I've said several times, is in itself confounding. It's remarkable. It suggests that there's some ability there that we weren't aware of. It suggests that I've often described this idea that we have this hyperdimensional heritage. It's a world that's not so much alien, but a world from which we have become alienated. DMT grants us this brief but astonishing glimpse at this remarkable hyperdimensional heritage. We've become alienated from that world, and this is also perhaps why when people take DMT, there is this profound sense of deja vu and familiarity. Deja vu, you really get this sense that this is the most fucking bizarre experience I couldn't possibly have imagined, and yet at the same time it is intensely familiar. I know this place. I've been here.
Really?
They welcome you back. You know, the lights start flashing. The bells are ringing. There's your name literally in lights. He's returned. We haven't seen you for so long. Terence McKenna used to say, right? It was kind of like that. There's so many people describe that, of being welcomed home in a sense, like we've been away for so very long. Again, if you take these intelligences seriously and you want to establish communication with them, you want to understand them, you want to know where they're from and what's the relationship between us and them, you have to stop treating DMT like a drug. Treat it like a technology. This technology is called Target Controlled Intravenous Infusion, TCIV, and it's well established as a technology that's been used for decades in anesthesiology. Okay. And my thought was, well, let's repurpose that. Let's replace the anesthetic drug with DMT. We can develop a mathematical model, the same pharmacokinetic model that's been used for anesthetics, but create it with using the data from DMT. If we do take these entities seriously, and I think we need to, I don't think it's simple to explain their presence within the DMT state. I don't think it's simple. I don't think it's easy to simply explain them away as hallucinations or as archetypal structures from the collective unconscious. There seems to be something much more profound going on here. These beings, they have clear intent. When you go into the space, they're waiting for you. They get to work, right? They get to work on you. They're expecting you. They welcome you, and they have an agenda. They have an agenda, and it seems to be far more than your brain just making it up. Your brain doesn't really, in my opinion at least, doesn't seem to have this ability to model these hyper-complex, hyper-dimensional realities filled with these beings that bear no relationship to anything in our world. So I think that we need to actually take seriously, and I say this as somebody who is something of a sober neuroscientist. I'm not one of these people who says, oh, it's the spirit world or it's the astral plane. I always avoid that because there's no explanation there for me. If you say, oh, you're going to the astral plane, I mean, well, what's the connection there? How does that work? What's the mechanics? So I'm looking for some kind of coherent explanation for what's going on. And I haven't found it in the orthodox paradigm of modern neuroscience at all. I've read the interpretations. I've read the explanations of the DMT state. It's hallucination. That doesn't make sense to me. These are far too complex. They're far too coherent to just be made up by the brain. But at the same time, I don't think that we can explain it in terms of archetypal structures as well. I think there's something completely non-human going on that has no relationship to either modern or ancestral humans. There's nothing in our evolutionary past, our historical past, that can explain why people are seeing these types of non-human, extremely advanced intelligences. So I think we have to start at least entertaining the idea that there's something far, far stranger going on.
But this is the question that must be asked. Who's in there? Who is this? There are at least three possibilities, and I'm not sure which is the most conservative. The first possibility is that we don't understand how the world is constructed, and that, in fact, there is a parallel universe running alongside of ours, full of elves who use a language to make objects. And then why you can burst through to this place on this one drug, then that raises, each explanation raises a lot of questions. Then the other possibility is, this is the Jungian possibility. And Jung, in I can't remember which one it was, but one of the later things, he talks about these elves because of the Cabiri. The Cabiri are the alchemical children that appear in Act 3 of Faust, that Jung spent a lot of time on these alchemical Cabiri and the question of the homunculus. And he says at one place, I think he says, he describes them as autonomous psychic elements that have escaped from the control of the ego. This is a weird way to go about it. I mean, it's probably an accurate description, but how much does it tell us, you know? It means that the psyche is to be visualized as a half-gallon of mercury, and when we throw it on the floor, the mercury balls up and spreads everywhere, and each ball of mercury you look at, by gad, it has a little face looking back at you. That's because mercury is a mirrored surface. You're looking at your own psyche shattered into thousands of pieces around you. Another possibility, and one I leaned toward for years, and I still lean toward, because I've noticed the radical nature of your explanation diminishes with the distance since the last time you smoked DMT. The longer it's been, the more likely you are to have some humdrum notion that you can pour it into. So the humdrum notion that I settled on was, well, clearly these are just extraterrestrials. They don't come in silver ships demanding to be taken to the National Defense Agency. This is how they come. Why they come this way, who knows? They're coming through mind. Mind is the medium in which they travel. Where do they come from? Who knows? Can it even be located in the Newtonian space-time matrix? I mean, what do you want here? A star catalog number? Would that satisfy you? And then finally, and I think I've exceeded my number of possible explanations, and then finally the explanation, which is my current favorite, it's a little disturbing, and I haven't quite figured out what to do with it, but I have a sense we're on the right track here. The reason the DMT space feels so peculiar, both alien and excruciatingly familiar, is because these things in this other place represent what I call an ecology of souls. This place is the one place you never thought you were going to make a visit to and come back to chat it around the coffee maker. They're dead. That's who these things are. This is the realm of the dead. Well, I have to confess, in all of my psychedelic voyaging and idea mongering and all of that, I never was able to go that far, to reach that far in my imagination. It sort of had to be presented to me. But if you go to shamans worldwide and talk to them about their spirit helpers and say, what's the deal with this? Who are these things? They say, well, these are the ancestors. Didn't you know? These are the ancestors. It's perfectly cut and dried and normal.
Deep beneath your conscious mind, hidden builders, elf-like forces, construct your psyche and lock you into mental knots. Carl Jung called them the Cabiri. Today you'll discover how these Cabiri live inside you and how recognizing them can set you free. To see where Dr. Jung got the idea, we go back to ancient Greece. The Idaean dactyls and curetes, blacksmith gods of Mount Ida, hammered iron, guided secret rites, and breathed life into raw matter. Jung wrote to Freud in 1909 that these Cabiri were primal, under-earth energies, the same subterranean power he'd later recognize in his own psyche. Now imagine a DMT trip where you lock eyes with Terence McKenna's machine elves. These electric, mischievous DMT entities dance on the edge of perception, flinging cryptic puzzles about how reality is assembled. One moment they vanish in a neon flash. The next, they thrust a flashing sword or a devilish knot into your mind, daring you to break free. That's exactly what Dr. Jung's Cabiri do, only they appear through dreams, active imagination, or other non-drug states. In 1917, during a visionary trance, Jung encountered the Cabiri and later recorded their words in his red book, Liber Novus. They told him, and I quote, "We hauled things up, we built, we placed stone upon stone. Now you stand on solid ground. We forged a flashing sword for you, with which you can cut the knot that entangles you. We also place before you the devilish, skillfully twined knot that locks and seals you. Strike, only sharpness will cut through it. Do not hesitate. We need destruction since we ourselves are the entanglement. He who wishes to conquer new land brings down the bridges behind him. Let us not exist any more. We are the 1,000 canals in which everything also flows back again into its origin." Dr. Jung responds to them, "What a work you have accomplished, Cabiri. You have given birth to a cruel law from the chaos that cannot be revoked. It is understood and accepted." The Cabiri answer, "Whoa, whoa! What we feared, what we desired, has come to pass." End of quote. Put simply, these Cabiri are the architects of your unconscious mental prisons. Their knot symbolizes the madness of unexamined thought. One moment they urge you, strike, and the next they warn that cutting that knot brings irreversible change. A cruel law emerging from chaos. Once you sever that knot, there's no going back to your old self. Over decades, Jung unpacked exactly what these Cabiri represent. In Symbols of Transformation, he writes, and I quote, "The Cabiri are, in fact, the mysterious creative powers, the gnomes who work under the earth, below the threshold of consciousness, in order to supply us with lucky ideas. As imps and hobgoblins, however, they also lay all sorts of nasty tricks, keeping back names and dates that were on the tip of the tongue, making us say the wrong thing, etc." End of quote. These Cabiri are your hidden, childlike creativity and unconscious drives, always lying just below conscious awareness. They help you invent and create, but they also sabotage you with forgotten memories or mislaid words. Later in the same volume, Jung unveils the world clock vision, and I quote, "This remarkable vision made a deep and lasting impression on the dreamer, an impression of the most sublime harmony, as he himself puts it. The world clock may well be the severe image which is identical with the Cabiri, the 4 children or 4 little men with the pendulums. It is a 3-dimensional mandala, a mandala in bodily form, signifying realization." End of quote. Here, Jung lays it out plainly. Those 4 dwarf-like figures form a mandala, a cosmic pattern guiding you toward wholeness, while simultaneously reminding you how entangled you remain. In Psychology and Alchemy, Jung hammers it home. I'm quoting directly. "Because of its contamination with the unconscious, thinking takes on the grotesque form of the Cabiri. For the Cabiri as dwarfs are chthonic gods and misshapen accordingly. I call them pot-bellied freaks of common clay. They stand in grotesque contrast to the heavenly gods and poke fun at them. We learn that there are really 7 of them, but again there is some difficulty with the 8th, as there was before with the 4th. Similarly, in contradiction to the previous emphasis placed on their lowly origin in the dark, it now appears that the Cabiri are actually to be found on Olympus, for they are eternally striving from the depths to the heights, and are therefore always to be found both below and above." End of quote. These grotesque dwarf gods aren't just odd figures. They dramatize how our thinking becomes warped by hidden impulses. Yet in that very distortion lies a thrust, dragging us from unconscious chaos up toward genuine insight. Carl Jung's Red Book also reveals Philemon, originally Atmaviktu, as his personal living Cabiri guide, his very own DMT entity, without the DMT. Philemon embodies the unconscious's raw creative impulse, a breath of life that can animate and transform the psyche from within. But the guide isn't always gentle. Philemon, like the Cabiri, also brought Jung face to face with the very forces that sabotage us from within. When you feel trapped by endless self-doubt, believing you're unworthy, punishing yourself after success, or convinced you'll never be enough, it's no random glitch. Those are Cabiri scripts playing on a loop beneath your awareness, keeping you alive but preventing you from truly thriving. If you've ever met McKenna's machine elves, you know they show up to dismantle loops too, only through an intense psychedelic doorway. The sword the Cabiri gave Jung is nothing literal. It's the razor-sharp insight you use to cut toxic patterns. When they said, "We forged a flashing sword for you, with which you can cut the knot that entangles you," they weren't talking about steel. They meant that moment of clarity when you see a belief for what it is and refuse to feed it. Think of a destructive cycle you're in right now. Maybe scrolling social media until you punish yourself with shame, or repeating an old relational drama. The Cabiri want you to strike, break that pattern. Yet they warn, do not hesitate. We need destruction, since we ourselves are the entanglement. Your unconscious, comfortable as it is, will fight to keep you entangled. Those 1,000 canals are the neural pathways and buried memories swirling beneath the surface. When you finally cut through, you unleash a new force. Once a negative belief or traumatic wound is faced, it changes the entire system. Jung responded to them, "What a work you have accomplished, Cabiri. You have given birth to a cruel law from the chaos that cannot be revoked. That cruel law is your new psychic reality. You can't unknow a truth that you have already seen. But here's the paradox. Those same Cabiri that entangle you also hold the creative spark that makes you uniquely you." Jung called them infantile or unconscious forces, represented as Cabiri and hobgoblins, the homunculi. They carry your raw life energy, creative drives, imaginative power, the urge to shape reality. In the world clock mandala, the 4 Cabiri figures each wield a pendulum, reminding you that the unconscious torsions and rhythms beneath your mind can be harnessed to create harmony. So where does that leave you? Ask yourself, when have you been possessed by a blind impulse that felt bigger than you? A fear that stopped you from reaching for your dreams? A self-sabotaging belief that whispered, "You'll never be enough"? Those are your Cabiri in action. They whisper, "We place stone upon stone. Now you stand on solid ground." But that ground can become a prison if you never cut the knot. Ask instead, what is the knot in your life right now? Maybe it's persistent anxiety, an old trauma, or that nagging idea that success will change you for the worse. The Cabiri dare you to look it in the eye. They hand you the sword, your capacity for brutal honesty, your willingness to dig into your behavior's roots. When you swing that sword, you bring down the bridges behind you. There is no going back to who you were before. I'm too scared to do that. My saboteur will destroy me, you might think. But destruction here means transformation. Dr. Jung puts it plainly, yet profoundly, in the Red Book. The entanglement is your madness. The sword is the overcoming of madness. Until you confront your own madness, your tangled thoughts and buried shame, you cannot become whole. You remain a Tom Thumb in the brain, small and imprisoned. But by cutting that knot, you can gain the form of a giant. When Jung wrote to Freud about the Cabiri in 1909, and I quote, "They are direct animators of inert matter, Lares and Penates in Italy, not primarily phallic, but elemental," end quote. He was pointing out that these forces animate every part of your life that feels rigid or lifeless. The Cabiri are the subterranean architects of your world. If you learn to see them, you can learn to wield them. Expect resistance. Your Cabiri will howl. Whoa, whoa! What we feared, what we desired, has come to pass. Anxiety, shame, and panic may surge when you try to cut the knot, but that inner turmoil is the energy you need for transformation. Jung's Cabiri even warned that they would die for him if he struck, showing that the very force binding you also fuels your liberation. Do remember, the Cabiri built you, but they don't have to own you. You have the sword. Now go cut your knot.
As far as DMT is concerned, ayahuasca is driven by DMT. What made me go to the Amazon was I first encountered DMT in the underground in Berkeley in 1967, and I was absolutely amazed. I mean, I had already taken LSD, but for me and to this moment, DMT is just the most amazing thing in the universe. I mean, it shouldn't exist. It's impossible. And every time I do it, I come down, I say, this is impossible. I mean, to call that a drug? What a joke. I mean, it just masquerades as a drug. It's not a drug. That's preposterous. The problem with DMT is its incredible power, that only the most intrepid can form any coherent impression whatsoever of what's going on if it's a strong trip. I mean, there are sub-threshold trips where you just graze the tummy of the beast, and then people come down with various models of archetypal closure with the cosmic carnival. That's the archetype of DMT, is the cosmic circus. But if you actually get a strong hit of it, which is in no way dangerous, but simply a true boundary dissolving hit, it's into some place. It's almost like, well, I once said, there's danger of death by astonishment. And I think that's true. That's the major danger, is death by astonishment. Because you just get in there and you say, my God, I thought I had some expectation of what was possible, and instead this is just so blown that, and it somewhat freaks me out. I have to confess, it is so alien, so huge, so complete in itself, so unrelated to our petty concerns on this planet. I mean, I went to it first as an art historian. And I was a Jungian. I mean, I had Jungian proclivities, and I thought, what does this say about the archetypes? There is no archetype for this. Not in the painting of the Bushman, not in the ecstasies of Hildegard von Bingen, not in the ravings of Mandaean ecstatics. Human spiritual experience never got this deep, never tore open this doorway. And yet what? It's a long toke away for an ordinary human being? How could something that titanic and beautiful and cosmic and alien be kept secret? When what we do is we seek in all corners, in all times and places, for the bizarre, the outre, the unthinkable. We're always turning over rocks, secret teachings, ancient cities, buried ruins, lost tribes, you name it. Well, then here is this thing which is like the absolute quintessence of what all those things are aiming for. More stunning than the rise of Atlantis from the Atlantic seaboard is a toke of DMT. More appalling than the arrival of alien star fleets in the skies of our planet. And yet, it's here. It's here. And I don't often invoke it. I mean, for me to talk about it is to invoke it, because it's weird to talk about it, because it reminds me that we don't know what we're doing at all, that we sit in rooms discussing all this stuff, and a war rages, ignorant armies clash by night, that whole thing. But this extraordinarily powerful thing, the depth of which, the measure of which is so hard to take, lies very near. What I had hoped for from ayahuasca was, my brother and I, when we got into this DMT stuff, we said, we've got to slow down this movie. I mean, you get in there for about 70 seconds. The first 35 of which is taken up with you checking all your meters to make sure you're not dead. Because that's what you assume. You say, I did it, I'm dead, fuck it, I'm dead. And then you say, but chest rising and falling, thoughts continuing in linear progression. Apparently I'm not dead. Apparently I'm something else. Well, then by the time you sort it out, you're usually coming down. And people come down babbling, raving. I mean, I've seen, people who've headed mega corporations, people who are accustomed to ordering hundreds of people around, just completely come apart because it is so unexpected. So our notion was slow the movie down, get in there. And ayahuasca looks like a strategy for doing that. And we couldn't imagine, can you picture people wearing penis sheaths and painting themselves with red ochre, and they have this, and this is what they're doing? And then it makes the whole notion of history seem crazy. I mean, we're primitives because we diddle around with atom smashers and stealth bombers and stuff like that. I mean, and these people have this other thing. So of course they don't wear clothes, build up. Would you? And largely, I would say what we've learned from 20, 25 years of dealing with this is that our strategy was right. Ayahuasca will let you in to these places, and so will psilocybin. What I've decided, based on experience, is that what I'm interested in is a very tiny subset of all the smorgasbord of possible altered states and experiences that life and nature offer up. That there are many altered states. Datura, ketamine, MDMA, endlessly, and then, states brought on by ordeal and fasting and meditation. I am only interested as a phenomenologist, definitely more with the attitude of the scientist than some kind of conclusion drawer. I'm interested in this very circumscribed area in organic nature, because it's not supposed to be there, folks. It's like a doorway into the previous universe or something. The whole, at the height of Islam in the 10th century, the poets of the Mughal dynasty said of the city of Isfahan in Iran, because of its mosques and architecture, that it was half the world. The Isfahan is half the world. DMT is half the world. The shiny, bright, active, exfoliating and bizarre part. Well, then we then are poised in this strange dimension of diminished possibility. Where are we? What is that? What is it to possess a body such that you can use it as an instrument to turn on and off these places? How does it reflect on the quest for understanding of the here and now? How does it reflect on the quest for, immortality or enlightenment or a sense of fitting in to the cosmic purpose? I don't know. I mean, one can play a reductionist game and say that the human brain mind system is an alarm clock. DMT is a hammer. Hit the alarm clock with the hammer and you learn all about gears because they spring out and become visible. But, and this is how science works. This is the scientific method. Smash it. Then count the pieces. Find the bigger pieces. Find the littlest pieces. Smash them. Count the pieces. Find the little pieces. Smash them. That's how it proceeds. Well, obviously, that's not going to take us too far in this domain because it's entirely made up of structure, of connection, of relationship, of thought. And because I'm concerned about the planet and the predicament we're in and the way we spend our resources and cheat our children of a sane future and all that, I keep trying to reconnect this back into the human world. But I frankly don't know whether that can be done. Another area I work in is I try to connect it up to the perennial philosophies of humanity, Zen and Buddhism and shamanism. I don't know whether that can be done. The shamans that I have gotten really close to have not been, I would not call, they were able to cure people, but they had no pretension of spiritual accomplishment. They weren't even interested in that. They were interested in what they would call understanding. The same thing which drives a scientist. They say, Don Fidel, who I took most of my ayahuasca with, we would take it on Saturday nights with a group of about 40 people and cure. And then we would take it on Wednesday nights, just he and I or a couple of other people. And that was for learning. He always said, and he said, you can't cure unless you learn. And I felt very comfortable with these people because it from the outside, it looks like ritual and taboo and power. And from the inside, it's just, hey, let's all cook something up and try to figure it out. It was totally familiar to me from my days in Berkeley in the 60s. It's the head ethic. It's cook it up, try it out, Try and make sense of it with your friends. And you see, I think it's very disempowering to believe that somebody else has the answer and that your life consists of sorting out a bunch of options to try and find this person who has the answer. The generous point of view, the ecumenical point of view when looking at the world's religions and spiritual traditions is to say everybody has a piece of the answer. You know, the Buddhists have a piece, the Kabbalists have a piece, everybody has a piece. The mushroom on this subject is extremely ungenerous. It says nobody has a piece. It's just preposterous. You know, the reason the world doesn't make sense to you is because the world doesn't make sense to you. How could it? I mean, look where you're starting from. Where is it writ in adamantine that troops of monkeys should comprehend the architectonics of the cosmos? You know, it's just not part of the deal. So then you have to rest with some kind of provisional arrangement. But I somehow think that the forced evolution of language is how we're going to work our way back into taking care of our planet, and that psychedelics are the catalyst for this. They show us, number one, that there is a transcendent other, which I certainly didn't believe there was till I took psychedelics. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic. I spent a lot of time deconditioning myself from the transcendent other and embracing a kind of materialist agnosticism. Well, that lasted 15 seconds into the first DMT trip, and then that had been vaporized for all time. So I think we need to honor the religious impulse, but I'm very skeptical of all hierarchical con games where the idea is somebody knows something and somebody else doesn't, and then they have to trade off their relationship. You know, the Rolling Stones have a song that says, you don't get what you want, you get what you need. I don't think you're going to spend very long involved with these things at a deep level without scaring your socks off eventually. I mean, one of the great things about these psychedelic teachers is that they are so gentle with beginners. And then the flip side of that coin is they are so unforgiving with veterans. And I don't know. I mean, I have hard trips often. And the way I explain it to myself is, you know, I pretty much accept Rupert Sheldrake's notion of the morphogenetic field and feel like the psychedelics amplify the morphogenetic field of the totality. And, you know, why shouldn't I have difficult trips? The totality is in such a weird state of turmoil. I mean, you couldn't pay me to take 5 grams of mushrooms in the present circumstances simply because I can feel the riptides in the historical dimension just churning everything into white water. I mean, I'd stay out of the water till it dies down a little. Fear is a problem because, well, there are different reasons, but here's a reductionist reason. These compounds are CNS stimulants, and that means they're going to stimulate what's called the fight or flight reflex in the hind brain and not do anything about it except breathe and sing, you know. Paul Herbert, the other Herbert, the Herbert who wrote Dune, who is such a minor figure that I can't even remember his first name, Frank Herbert. He has a wonderful thing in there talking about fear. And he says, you know, just crumple. You have to oxygenate your body. You have to begin moving energy through your body. You can sing your way out of most situations. That's the best advice. And you can breathe your way out of most situations. And It's a set of techniques. No, you're quite right. It's a set of techniques. They're very simple, but if you don't know them, you're in deep, deep water. And breath control and not being afraid to articulate. We have some kind of taboo against sounding. But, you know, I've started in the depths of hell singing to save my soul and managed to sing my way right through normality and right on into heaven, you know. It takes courage. And courage is not something that is demanded of us very much in the modern world. I mean, we occasionally deal with large amounts of fear, like when some jackass cuts in front of you on the freeway and, you know, you soak your clothes with sweat in under a third of a second, those kinds of things. But courage, where we actually determine to do something that feels dangerous or challenging to us, and then doing it, we don't do. And especially boundary dissolving challenges. I mean, the macho type will, you know, climb El Capitan, jump out of airplanes, and that sort of thing. But strangely enough, those macho types are sometimes the most reluctant to just sit quietly in their living room on 5 dried grams, because it's a different kind of surrender. You know, it's a surrender to something feminine and penetrating, and you don't have to. It's the opposite reflex. Surrender is the opposite reflex to conquest. Did you want to say something? No? Yeah?
Could you contrast this experience with the experience like the trance dance or the Bushman or Kundalini type of experiences?
Well, it's very hard to get inside somebody else's experience, especially when it's culture bound. For purposes of operational efficiency, I just have long ago decided nothing works but drugs. And it causes a lot of friction. I mean, that's the hard way of putting it. It's really nothing works but plants. But, I put in a lot of time trying, you know, breath control and pranayama and all these things and reading the literature. And I'm just not convinced that they're getting it. The literature doesn't reflect it. The mystical literature in all times and places tends toward unitary, effulgence or something, the white light. In other words, everything is supposed to be, all contradictions are dissolved, everything becomes love and light, and the hierophany. This is the archetypal hierophany. This is not what they're talking about in the Amazon. They enter into a world of jeweled multiplicity. There is no effort to push it towards some kind of Neoplatonic end state. It's that what is revealed is a dimension of incredible complexity. And some people have said of me, to me, that I'm lost in samsara. I can accept that. That sounds right. I love multiplicity. I mean, I love nature, which to me means multiplicity. I'm an insect collector, for God's sake, an art historian, a heresy hunter. It's for me all in the details. That's what I love, the richness, the texture of it. And it's a troubling question for people, because people want to be told that there's another way to get to it. And there may be, but it's unbelievably difficult, unbelievably uncertain, and very hard to recognize. Schizophrenia, it doesn't convince me entirely that that's the same thing. Many schizophrenics are obviously very, very unhappy people. And you see, I just don't feel the force of this argument that you should be able to do it on your own. Why should you be able to do it on your own? How about that you can't do it unless you humble yourself to cut a deal with a plant? That seems more logical to me, that it begins with an act of humility instead of an act of, no women, no dope, no this, I'm going to seal myself into the alchemical vessel. Yeah. Obviously, the mind-brain system can be thought of as like an automobile, in the sense that there are always fuel efficiency modifications and design modifications that are possible to imagine, which would make the whole system work better. Serotonin is the molecule that is being competed with by these drug molecules. Well, may it not then be that what these drug molecules represent is the same thing that serotonin represents, but in a slightly more efficient packaging? That somehow, from the point of view of cellular, of metabolic dynamics, the drug molecule is more efficient. It obviously is. That's why it has a greater affinity for the bond site than the endogenously produced neurotransmitter. Well, it's as though, and I think Aldous Huxley was the first person to suggest this, that the mundane demands of day-to-day life and evolution, the need to be ever on the alert for attack and so forth, it has led us to evolve a neurological style of chemical suppression of consciousness, that we have narrowed our awareness down into certain narrow channels along which danger may approach. But conceivably, this style of this flavor of human brain soup could be changed for a different flavor, in which we walked around with a much larger awareness and much less immediate focus on being prepared to fall into a fighting stance and fend off an immediate attack on ourselves. I think that what I see as characteristic of psychedelic people and psychedelic communities is a kind of tendency to go for the big picture. Psychedelic people always are aware that whatever they're talking about is nested in a still larger set of relationships, nested in a still larger set of relationships. That awareness of the big picture could probably be mapped onto what is ordinarily called an awareness of Tao. It's that you don't get down into the little stuff because you know what the I Ching calls the prepotent systems of relationship in which the event is embedded. And that feeds back into the personality, that knowing of that, as permission to relax. You're neither pushing the river nor pulling the river. It goes in its good time, and you always seem to be comfortable and there with it. See, this logos, this vegetable mind that I keep referring back to, it may be nothing more than the voice of our own DNA. But whatever it is, when we do not have it guiding us and cultivated within our personality, then it becomes all up to the ego to figure out. And the ego is a frightened, pathetic, grasping creature and will make a mess of it, you may be sure.
So the guiding principles, for the work after I completed my DMT study 20 years ago now, were the words of two mentors. One was a psychiatrist, Daniel Friedman, whose mantra about psychedelics were, if, so what? If DMT, causes these effects, so what? What's it good for? What does it mean? What can we learn from it? Okay, so hopefully I've, covered or been influenced by those guiding principles, like if, so what? And we must at the very least enlarge the discussion about psychedelics. So as quite a few of you know, when you take a full dose of DMT, it starts to work very quickly. There's a rush of inner pressure and acceleration. And then within a minute or so, there's the experience of the separation of the mind and body. and you enter into a world of bright, rapidly moving light. Your sense of self is maintained. There's not really very often a merging with a white light. There's intense emotion sometimes, sometimes there's not much emotion at all. And it's usually, contains some intelligences of some sort or another, more or less, recognizable. They may look, kind of humanoid or reptilian or bird-like, mammalian, robotic. Even furniture could, seem, to possess an intelligence and a sentience. Even the patterns, seem to contain intelligence. The unformed, visual patterns. And it's quite highly interactive. It isn't like you're just, kind of unified with anything. You're dealing with all that stuff out there. It's dealing with you. You're dealing with it. There's a lot of give and take. You're able to control your awareness. It isn't a passive state in as much as you're immobilized, but your mind is active and, kind of determining what's going on around you. Since I stopped my work 20 years ago, I've been, thinking about it, obviously, most of the time. And so one of the, things that has been helpful in thinking about the spiritual or the religious, properties of these, substances, more of any spiritual experience is to dichotomize them between, what I call a mystical unitive state and an interactive relational one. So to read the Hebrew Bible is not easy. It's a very tough nut to crack, let me tell you. There's a certain, resonance, between the spoken, voice and the words and your brain and your spirit that I think are, they're optimally activated when you read out loud. And if you really study the book, carefully, once you read it through a number of times, you begin entering into a specific state, like it's an altered state, which was very curious. So you're kind of, resonating with the state out of which, the text emerged. And it's a prophetic text, so you're kind of entering into a prophetic altered state. So if you want to, get a, sense of the, psychedelic quality of, some of the visions in the Hebrew Bible, the first chapter of Ezekiel is pretty DMT-like. So the heavens open and, and he saw visions, a stormy wind, he was being blown around. There was a, great cloud, flashing fire, brilliance all around, lightning. And beings emerged from the fire with a number of different faces. They ran to and fro without their legs moving. Their backs and wings were full of eyes. The beings were flying through space. The sound of the wings, the expanse over their heads like blue sapphire or like a rainbow. It's just too much for Ezekiel, and he just falls down. And, so the angel picks him back up and starts speaking to him. Pulls him by the hair, carries him through space. What could be more DMT-like? So one of the, we have to kind of, wonder about, the power of, the Bible. And I think it's because it's a prophetic text. It's like a spiritual text, which, came out of a specific state. And I think that state has a tremendous amount of power. Look at all of you, because you're here, because of, the psychedelic state. And there's, clearly an overlap between the psychedelic and the prophetic state. And the staying power, the influence of the text, I think, relates, to being a description of spiritual experience of a certain type. So shamanism also proposes, the reality of the DMT beings and the DMT world. And specifically, specifically, for goals, like for healing, for harming, locating lost objects, for the benefit of the community. So in comparing, religious models and, scientific models, concerning, the nature of the DMT world, they're both interested in these previously invisible worlds. And also they provide, mechanisms by which to understand what's happening. One of the advantages of the religious models is that they suggest why things are configured in this way, like a purpose, as it were. It's a reflection of a higher order of intelligence or wisdom or will. So the model that I propose towards the end of my first DMT book is what one might call soft neurotheology. In other words, as a result of brain chemistry changes, your consciousness is now able to perceive things which are normally invisible but objectively real, such as dark matter and parallel universes. And also it would provide the ability to interact with and apprehend the contents of those parallel sorts of worlds, ongoing parallel levels of ongoing reality. So that proposes the reality of the DMT world. So I came up with a new model to kind of counterbalance the neurotheology model, and this is what I call theoneurology. Which is kind of a top-down model, as opposed to the bottom-up neurotheological model. So hopefully people will think about it and begin developing it, and hopefully it will integrate theistic and materialistic models. So it will include both rigor and wisdom. And ultimately, it's based on medieval metaphysics, from Maimonides in particular, and it proposes mostly, or more or less, that the activation of our intellect and our imagination takes place by God. So the activation of our imagination is responsible for the contents of the state, the visions and the voices. And the activation of our intellect, then allows us to extract the meaning, from those visions and those voices. So one new category I came up with when I was comparing the two states, like I spent maybe 3 years, looking, through the Bible over and over and over again, and bending the descriptions in the Bible into the categories I had developed, using the skandha system. For the DMT state, like perception, cognition, emotion, those kinds of things. So in the description of Ezekiel falling on his face, so that's a physical effect. So I would bend that description into physical effect. But after a while, it didn't. In making that comparison, it didn't quite, seem like I was, capturing all of the, similarities or the differences. And so I developed a new concept called relatedness, which then started to, tease apart or make, clearer, the difference between the DMT and the prophetic states. Because the quality of the relatedness was much more highly articulated in the descriptions of the prophetic experience as compared to the descriptions of the relatedness that my DMT volunteers brought back. So it's a means of communicating, and primarily verbal. When you're in, the DMT state, there is an attempt, by the beings to communicate. And, one of the, common complaints of the volunteers is they couldn't quite understand what the beings were saying to them. Either they were too anxious, or they didn't understand the language, or it was too soft. one of the things that you'll see in the Hebrew Bible is that it's mostly verbal communication. There are clearly visions, but the visions either represent some verbal message, or are just intended to get the attention of the prophet in order to start speaking with him. So when you begin to do deep study of the text, it is an altered state, and it is stimulated by, and it resonates, with, the visions and the voices and the feelings. But I think more importantly, it, resonates, with the message of this state. It's as if you're being spoken to about, something that's quite, fundamental, as opposed to just, seeing things which are amazing and unusual. So this is one of the most important points I want to make is, when you're tripping, there are these visions, but there's also this, sense of knowing, something new. You're kind of getting something that you've never gotten before. And that's an intellectual apprehension. That's not a perceptual apprehension. So when you're, reading the Hebrew Bible, you start to get a glimpse of what that intellectual apprehension might possibly, be that you're glimpsing in the psychedelic state. Or that's, kind of how I started to, to conceptualize it. Yeah, so you're kind of, in a way closing in on God's mind. If, the text is a prophetic text and prophecy is communication between us and, the divine, then you're getting into or approaching, the mind of divinity. And you can also, instead of opening up to love or being mindful or, letting go, you could pray. You could pray to God, for help. As opposed to, letting go or, feeling love or those kinds of things. It's a more, it's more of an interactive way of, dealing with, the psychedelic state. If you're in a tight spot, you could pray. You could pray to something, which isn't you, because it isn't all you. Well, if you are then able to start to understand the text as, kind of a specific way of approaching the psychedelic state, then it adds a dimension, to the experience, like on top of the emotions and, the perceptions. So we can think about it, and we can talk about it. It isn't ineffable anymore. Everything's ineffable. But some things are more ineffable than others. So if you can make it less ineffable, I think you've got like a head start. As opposed to saying you can't talk about it, you can say, well, you can talk about it, and it's kind of like this and it's kind of like that. There's one God, and there's intermediaries, and there's providence, and there's reward and punishment. So how does that kind of manifest within your own psychedelic experience? Let's say. So it isn't, that you're purely, remembering a sense or a, feeling that you had back then. You've got, more to take home and to chew on and to write about and to think about, to converse with your colleagues and friends with. So, the phenomenology is, one thing, but, the phenomenology kind of expresses the message. It's, like a symbolic representation of the message. And the message is more verbal in the prophetic text. And so that makes you wonder, can the Hebrew Bible, which is a spiritual text describing a DMT-like world, help us extract information from the DMT state? So what is the prophetic message? Well, it mostly has to deal with the nature of reality and how to relate to it, the highest possible manner, to do the least harm and do the most good. Yeah, so the other aspect of the message of the text is relating to everything else other than the spiritual world, and so that's the golden rule, which is in Leviticus, and the golden rule in the Hebrew Bible is different than the golden rule in the Christian Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it's a little more elevated, it's a little more idealistic, I suppose. Love your neighbor as yourself, as opposed to as opposed to treating others as you would like to be treated. So this speaks about love for example, rather than, narcissism or, self-servingness.